Hello, everyone. Let me introduce myself and my colleagues. My name is Artem Tidva. I am a part of the organization Social Movement, trade union activist, have been creating and helping to create trade unions at different workplaces in Ukraine, studying how the organizations tasked with protecting labor rights work in Ukraine and how they work in other countries abroad. Later, I will introduce all the panelists of our today's event. Our event, the section within the conference organized by the Commons Journal, is dedicated to a discussion about labor rights and their role in ensuring sustainable peace globally. We would also like to, with the help of our today's discussion, open the floor to the discussion of possibilities of positive scenario concerning labor rights in Ukraine, guaranteeing the labor rights, the rights of workers. I'd like to say a few words about our technical peculiarities of the work today. We have two channels. So the word is Zoom decided to allow Ukrainian users to use more than 30 minutes free of charge. But after canceling the 30-minute limit, unfortunately, they, for some reason, did not enter the Ukrainian interpretation, Ukrainian language buttons. That's why we have this English channel and a Russian channel. So if you need interpretation, there is a button you should press on the panel below if you need to listen to what's being said in English or maybe in Ukrainian. I'll try to repeat that in English.
Interpretation now from Ukrainian to English. You can put on the globe in the bottom of your screen to change the audio track, and you will hear English or Ukrainian opportunities to hear us. Я тепер перейшов на українську.
Okay, I'm back to the Ukrainian channel. Let me introduce our panelists. Today we have with us Pavlo Babich, the deputy head of the youth board of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, and the head of the youth board of the Kyiv Municipal Board of Trade Unions. And then Kirill Buketov, our next guest, is not with us yet. He is an expert of the Global Labor Institute, a representative of the International Union, IUF, of the workers of food industry and allied industries. Then we have also Vasyl Andreyev with us today. He holds a PhD in governance, and he is a deputy head of the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine. Our fourth speaker is Serhiy Savchuk. He is the national coordinator of the International Labor Organization in Ukraine. And then also we have Vitaly Dudin with us. He is the head of the NGO Social Movement, Соціальний рух, and coordinator of the Трудооборона Labor Rights Defense organization. Today, each of us will talk for approximately 10 minutes, trying to discuss the situation with Ukrainian working collectives, the veterans of labor, as well as people who are earning their living thanks to their own labor, people who have no opportunity not to work and are forced to work under any possible conditions. We'll talk about how this influences the labor market and which adaptive strategies employers as well as lawmakers are choosing today. and we'll talk about the challenges, new challenges faced by the workers in Ukraine, and then also which possibilities, which chances we have of intensifying or starting perhaps trade union movement in certain areas, what potentially the integration of Ukraine into the European Union could give us, which possibilities, chances that would mean for workers, and how the workers could rebuild Ukraine in such a way so as to, with our entry into the European Union, to make sure that the salaries, the wages in Ukraine actually go up and level up with the European salaries, instead of us becoming just a cheap labor resource. At the end of the Second World War, people saw that the representatives of the workers of the International Labour Organization within the Philadelphia Declaration organized the foundations for the future development of labor that takes place in conditions that ensure dignity. So how can we use the experience of the international global changes to laws in order to adapt them to our Ukrainian conditions, and how can Ukrainian workers win in this war, which Ukraine, of course, will win as a country, as a nation, because we're fighting for freedom and democracy and for ensuring that the rights of people, human rights, are protected. So our first speaker today, Pavlo Babich. The floor is given to Pavlo. You have 10 minutes. Hello, everyone. So Artem correctly pointed to what I would like to discuss today. The young people defending our country. Artem mentioned that he saw our video created to celebrate the Labor Day. So our main message is that while young people, while workers are there defending Ukraine at the front, we should ensure that there are no blows that the working class receives from lawmakers here on the home front. And also I'd like to talk about the challenges that we faced. Basically, it's the same kind of problem, the same kind of challenge that everyone is facing today, which is the war, and we need to do everything in order for this war to end as quickly as possible. So that's why we organized this headquarters of material help to people, to workers in Ukraine. And we talked about it and posted about that a lot, spread the information. We see that as the very topical, urgent initiative. Half of us, though, is at the front, but the other half is here and helping them on the home front. What we can actually do today to make sure that after Ukrainian victory, it will be easier for us to rebuild Ukraine. It's given us the opportunity to influence the adoption of changes to the law governing labor rights and labor relationships, because after the war started, actually a couple of laws were adopted which are not really in line with the protection of workers' rights. So first of all, this concerns the possible dismissals. This is something that is a challenge for us even now. And then the law which allowed to stop the labor contracts. I'm also part of a trade union at workplace, and unfortunately some of the articles of the labor contract do not work now because the lawmakers allowed the employers to stop acting on some of their obligations. So we need to try to influence as far as possible the mechanisms which lead to the adoption of changes in the legal sphere. We need to be a party in the process of such negotiations. I talked about this before the war, and right now the communication with the authorities has become even more difficult. I think one of the reasons behind those difficulties in communicating our opinion to them and so on is basically that we are not finding common language with the people in charge of the country that are digitalized and so on, but people in trade unions are not really into the new technologies and how things work in contemporary world. So I think young people really need to become a part of the process because they are the part who speak the same language as our authorities do in terms of this digitalization. This is something that we need to start working on today, because later we'll have no time for this. It will be the time of rebuilding our country. So finding common language is a task for today. And also I'd like to draw attention to another thing. I communicate basically every time with people who come to work for the first time. I do the onboarding, I inform them about the trade union, and people, especially young people, very often do not understand what a trade union is, what it does, why we need it. So you basically need to start telling them about that from scratch. I think that in educational establishments like schools, universities, this should be part of the educational program. People should be informed about their labor rights, about the mechanism behind the actions of trade unions and so on. Half of the people, I would say, do not understand how those things work. So I think we need to change our approach to education in this respect. These are, I think, the key points, the key steps we need to focus on right now. Briefly, I would say that's all, and then if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you, Pavlo. And then we finally have Kirill Buketov with us as well. He is an expert of the Global Labor Institute and the representative of the International Union of Associations of Workers of Food Industry and Allied Industries. Let's maybe say a few words while Kirill is turning on his audio and video. Let me say a few words about Kirill. Kirill watched for a long time the changes happening
в правозахисному полі в Росії.
Human rights sphere in Ukraine as well as in other countries. So we have been cooperating with the
І я думаю, з перспективи людини, яка бачила, як
that from the viewpoint of someone who observed the process of attacking workers' rights in a neighboring country, in Russia, someone who saw how the freedom of opinion was attacked. I think Kirill, as a person who saw that, could maybe tell us about that. How did it happen? How exactly in Russia this situation happened? How did it come to this situation when on a Ukrainian power plant Russian workers are replacing Ukrainian workers? How is that possible? Maybe you could tell us something about that.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. And as an international expert, I'm going to speak in English, if that is okay for everyone. And I would like to start with main thesis, which is enshrined in the ILO Constitution and the ILO Fundamental Construction, which was developed after the First World War, when the United Nations came together to discuss how it is possible to prevent a horrible war like the First World War to happen again. And the ILO was born as a result of the peace process and the peace treaty to say that this is a recognition of the very basic fact that poverty in one country is a threat to others, because poor population is the most suitable resource for the war propaganda and for the hatreds, and mobilization of poor people to the war is the easiest task. This is what we actually observed in the past several years in happening in Russia. As an activist of the labor movement, I was indeed involved in several campaigns in Russia when very poor people were trying to organize in the union and to demand a more decent salary, more decent pay, and they were faced with quite sharp repressions, which we were not able to explain at the moment. But now, looking back in the history of the past several years, we can clearly see that this was a strategy of the Russian government, which was supported by the corporations, by the Russian corporations, but also by the international, transnational corporations. And the strategy was to keep people in poverty. I will not be using here the statistical data. We all know that it's quite easy to manipulate with the figures, but even the official statistics shows that more than 16 million people in Russia were living and still living beyond the poverty level, in miserable poverty. So of course, these are the people who are easily recruited when they're offered a serious or even miserable compensation for their agreement to participate in the military operations. But that is also the reason why these people are not able to critically evaluate what is happening around them, because miserable income means lack of access to the quality education, the education which help you to develop critical mind. It means limited access to proper information, good quality information, which helps you to understand what is happening. So poor people are much easier doomed by the propaganda. And this is now clear that for all these years, even in the very, very good economical years for Russian economy, when the state budget was making mega profits, the level of salaries and minimal wage was kept at a very low level. And when people were raising the demand for the wage increase, they were told this is not patriotic to demand a better pay because your country needs more resources. This was seriously an argument we've heard in the negotiations and the plant level, but also from the level of the Ministry of Labor, who was actually supporting this miserable income policy. There were several cases which also surprised us a lot. And these were the cases when our organizers were trying to recruit workers and campaign for the improvements in the multinational companies. And then they were faced with an attempt of management to get KGB, secret services, involved in suppressing these attempts. So the union organizing was considered to be an extremist act. That happened first in Belarus, in Minsk, when the workers of Coca-Cola tried to organize. Then it was repeated at Nestle plant in Perm, and there were several other examples. When we were trying to raise an argument with transnational companies that the level of pay, colleagues, please. When the level of pay in Russia and in Germany is dramatically different in the similar plants of Nestle, the same factory which produced KitKat for Germany and for Russia, the two absolutely similar enterprises, similar requirements for the quality and for the productivity in these plants, but the salary of Russian workers is 10 times less than in Germany. And the response from Nestle was, well, the Russian market is so different. But this is very easy to challenge. If you go to the supermarket and you see the price of the Kit Kat and compare the price in Germany and in Russia, you will see it is equal. It is the same price in the market. But that means that the Russian workers will pay 10 times less, and 90% of their income was just disappearing somewhere. And this was a deliberate policy of transnational companies. So when this war, there's a second war of Russia against Ukraine started this year, we demanded as IVF, we demanded that transnational companies have to withdraw from Russia their business, because by keeping their business in the country, they keep paying the taxes, which are going to the national budget, which is then going to be used for buying bombs, which will be thrown on the factories of the same companies in Ukraine. And the response was, oh, well, this will not be really a responsible way for us to operate, because we have to take care of social standards and other standards. And to be honest, this was very cynical. They didn't care for these standards for all these years, and they have no explanation. There is no argument and no reason for them to keep their business in Russia. And we think that this has to be raised everywhere, but of course, as a demand, it should first of all come from Ukraine, from the Ukrainian workers, probably working in the same companies. That's one thing. Another thing which is very important for us at the moment, and which I wanted to bring your attention to, as we're saying that the ILO as a construction was created with an idea that the peace has to be guaranteed and sustainable, and that is very much relates to the ability of all the countries to implement international labor standards, and there should be international labor standards. This construction is now under attack by right-wing governments and forces all across the world. People are saying the ILO and the UN system is not able to guarantee and to bring any result. That actually means that we have to mobilize all our resources to support the system, to make it more strong. And here we're also coming to a very practical thing, which is related to the fate of our colleagues and comrades from Belarus. You know that the leadership of the Belarusian Congress of Democratic Trade Unions was placed under arrest after they have spoken against the war. At the moment, more than 35 people are in prisons, and several dozen of families of the union leaders had to emigrate from the country. The ILO will be discussing in its governing body in November, very soon, the situation in Belarus, and will discuss for the first time seriously an idea of applying Article 33 of the ILO Constitution to Belarus. That is a unique mechanism which was only used in the history once. And now we are trying to make every argument to say this is a time to use it in terms of Belarus, which is a mechanism of sanctions, because this is the way the ILO have to respond to the several serious attacks on the workers' rights, on the international labor standards. There will be a big discussion and debate at the governing body of the ILO. There are 56 members of this body. Half of them are the governments, and other half representatives of the employers and the workers. And the employers are trying to stop this because they say we don't want ILO to make this mechanism as a regular mechanism. So we shall not create another precedent. Here the workers' voice is important, but we are still in minority. The governments will make a decision. And on the list of the governments which are represented in the governing body of ILO, we will not find, unfortunately, Ukraine. It is not even in the substitutes list. But it is important if we're discussing the future of Ukraine that it should become one of the main supporters of the idea that the ILO instruments and ILO as an organization have to get stronger. And of course, in this situation of today, President of Ukraine is one of the most influential person in the world. I think many governments will hear to the opinion of the Ukraine, even if it's not on the governing body. So that's one of the very practical tasks which we can think of in terms of the future of the country, its prospects and perspectives for a democratic and social justice construction of the society. So that's this is a few theses which I wanted to share with you. Unfortunately, I was not able to make a presentation. It was in a very late minute, but I will be happy if you have questions or comments or responses to what I said. And yeah, I will be very much interested to continue this dialogue as an international unionist for years. And indeed, I know many of you. So thank you for inviting me to speak, to address you, and we'll be happy to communicate in future.
Собі, Кirill. Зараз я маю зробити технічну
Thank you, Kirill.
I'd like to make a technical pause because there is an air raid alert all over Ukraine, and we have this announcement from Kyiv. So go to some shelter if you need to. If you feel you can continue participation in our event, then I will pass floor to the next person. So, Vasyl, floor to you. Can you join us? Head of the Trade Union of Construction Workers of Ukraine.
Yes, thank you. I will probably start talking a bit later, and I'm inviting our next speaker, Vasyl, to take the floor instead of me right now. I'm in the center right now in my office, and I would like to move away from that if possible. So thank you. I'll speak to you later. Okay, so then Serhiy Savchuk, the international coordinator of the ILO in Ukraine. Thank you, Artem. Thank you, everyone, our panelists, and also our attendees of our event, those who joined us online. And I would like to observe where our discussion takes us. So Kirill already mentioned this. The International Labour Organization has been mentioned, and the code, the statute it operates based on, and the Philadelphia Declaration has been mentioned as well. I would like to start from saying that it's a very timely event which we have today to talk about the post-war labor market and what that will bring us. We do understand that there is war right now. We have this air raid alert, but still, I think it's important to start talking about those issues today. I think that today's event is actually very timely, as we remember the Philadelphia Declaration was adopted during the Second World War, while the war was still ongoing in 1944. And the main source of inspiration and the main editor was the person that was at the helm of the International Labour Organization at the time. So it was signed in the White Office at the desk of the Roosevelt, who was at the time the president of the United States of America, who also signed the declaration. So at that time, when the Second World War was still in full swing, with aviation and artillery striking and and war events, hostilities taking place everywhere. Even at the time, the international community was thinking about post-war work and post-war rebuilding and the principles that this kind of reconstruction should be based on. It seems to me that it's very important that we are meeting today and are starting to talk about the future developments of social and labor relationships after the war, while we're still in a war situation. I think it's a task which is perhaps a bit easier for us because we have those underlying documents adopted by some generations ago. So these would be the Philadelphia Declaration and the principles that are enshrined in this document, and also a series of documents adopted by other organizations like the Declaration of the Human Rights, the Bill of the Cultural and Other Rights, labor rights, and so on, which, for example, enshrines the right to the creation of trade unions and the protection of rights. And then the Rome Statute. And also, we should mention that this treaty basically enshrines the labor negotiations and relationships as an important part of the social sphere and the labor sphere, and then a series of directives of the European Union that also create the framework for the legal mechanisms on the territory of the European Union. And this is something that we also signed up for after the agreement and the association was adopted. So we agreed to also integrate the documents, the principles, the laws of the European Union governing the labor relationships into our life. Plus many documents which have been ratified since then. In war conditions, what's part of the international law, the conventions, protecting the fundamental human rights in the sphere of labor relationships. And we should mention that Ukraine ratified 8 of them, all 8 of them. We are talking about the freedom to create trade unions and to conduct labor negotiations, and those that prohibit and fight against child labor and also forced labor and any kind of targeting any kind of discrimination at work. This year, a decision was also adopted on joining the joining to the fundamental rights, adding to the fundamental rights the right to the safety and security at work with respect to working conditions. So this has been added to the fundamental rights. Today, Ukraine ratified most of the conventions governing those rights, and I think we are going to ratify the Convention on Safety and Security in the Workplace. So, in terms of the framework, the system within which our discussion takes place today, basically this is a very comprehensive framework. which clearly indicates what kind of direction we can take in terms of post-war reconstruction and rebuilding. And we understand that there will be quite a lot to reconstruct or rebuild. Unfortunately, we don't have the comprehensive figures today, the statistical data. Based on the monitors of the International Labour Organization examining the impact of war in Ukraine on the labor sphere, which was published in May, and we are waiting for the second edition with new data. But anyway, based on this May edition, we can say that according to ILO assessment, 5 million jobs have been lost compared to the pre-war time, which means approximately 30% of the pre-war level of employment in Ukraine. So we are looking at huge losses in the sphere of employment. And we're talking about this huge dislocation. People are forced to become IDPs, but also to flee abroad. And many millions of Ukrainians either crossed the border and fled to other countries or became IDPs, as we know. Apart from this, and this is also something that the International Labour Organization mentions in many of its declarations, we see the tendency where the aggressor state is targeting objects of infrastructure and those that have some strategic importance for the economy of the country, and those that create and maintain the level of employment in the country. So we're talking about enterprises creating employment, creating the chain of supplies. Recently, also, we're talking about Russia targeting about the energy infrastructure objects. And this has a cumulative effect. It means that jobs are lost by the workers. It means the loss of profits at the enterprises under shell and missile strikes, but also at the enterprises that are, for example, part of this chain of supply, or those that are the users, the consumers of the electricity produced by energy corporations. And this, of course, we are afraid will lead to, could lead to a further loss of employment, further loss of jobs. We hope, however, that the situation nonetheless will reach its logical culmination, logical end. And I hope everyone understands what we mean by that, what I mean by that. This means the unconditional victory of Ukraine. So the tasks we are facing today, the trade unions, the employers, the government, these are, of course, the challenges of reconstruction. I think task number one for trade unions and employers in war conditions is to ensure that trade unions remain or maintain there, and also the enterprises stay in place, because they are an important element of the democracy and freedom of opinions expressed in labor relationships in the labor sphere, and post-war reconstruction without the equal participation of both employers and also workers via trade unions, for example. This kind of reconstruction without this element does not seem viable. So International Labour Organization and also other partners are supporting the organizations of employers and trade unions in Ukraine in order not just to support them, maintain them, but also to provide them with direct humanitarian aid through trade union structures, different organizations of employers, different networks, enabling the supply of humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Apart from this, though, when we look at the question of post-war reconstruction, I think that we need some kind of reset in the sphere of labor relations. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but this is a challenge. This kind of reset will be probably accompanied by dealing with such challenges as the dislocation, relocation of labor resources. Many refugees will probably stay abroad. So we are potentially talking about further relocation of enterprises, their return to their initial place, etc. Right now, social connections are being lost, being broken, and I think this will continue. Post-war reconstruction will also require new skills, a huge number of new skills. It will be necessary to organize professional technical education and to organize it in such a way that we can supply the market with the skills that are needed at the moment, and to do that quickly. Some skills will be in demand and will be lacking on the market. We should probably expect a huge migration of workers, of labor force to Ukraine from other countries, not necessarily Ukrainians, perhaps citizens of other countries. And we should pay attention to non-discrimination, fighting against discrimination in the sphere of labor, in order for the labor market to develop properly, without imbalances, without their imagined ghettos for certain kinds of workers. The development of digital technologies is also an important question. I think that this will broaden the sphere of non-standard forms of employment. Even today, Ukraine is the leader among European countries in terms of the digital labor platforms. Today, this is an important question that needs to be addressed. This will still be an important question in the nearest future. And then we have the informal employment. That sector is growing today. People are actually contributing to the sphere of social protection, social care by paying their due to the pension fund. The number of those people is unfortunately decreased. The pension fund is experiencing this deficit in terms of payments they receive. This is an important issue as well. And the last point I would like to make is that we need to preserve the level of representation in the context of this relocation of enterprises and labor resources. Previously, we had this territorial or industry principle based on which trade unions were organized. Today, we need to think about new approaches to how the work of trade unions is organized and enrollment into them is organized. So perhaps there should be some alternative principles at work, like, for example, the territorial principle should be supplemented by something else, like direct membership in trade unions and so on. So this is something that has to be discussed in terms of which alternatives could be found. And then the reform of the labor legal framework. This is also an important issue. So there is the international labor law, of course, which has many instruments to protect labor rights and creates the general framework for potentially reforming the legal framework to do with labor relations in Ukraine. I think that if Ukrainian lawmakers are guided by those principles enshrined in the international labor law, this will be very beneficial. The current drafts adopted in Ukraine are right now being examined by the International Labour Organization, and Ukraine is expecting comments from international partners. Actually, the Ministry of Economics in Ukraine asked international partners to look at whether the legal norms introduced by Ukraine correspond to the principles and legal framework of the European Union international labor law. I think this is a positive development, a good sign, meaning that Ukrainian government actually wants the draft law to correspond to European legal norms. So we hope that even if we find some discrepancies between the initiatives of Ukrainian lawmakers and the European international principles, still I hope that the new law will correspond to main international norms. I will probably stop here, and I am open to answering any questions you have. We are inviting our next speaker, Vasyl. Yes, I will be able to talk to you, but I will speak off camera. So I would say that the labor law is experiencing a huge crisis today. And I think after our victory, the crisis will only become more profound and grow. And I will tell you why I think so. In terms of how we assess the situation in our trade union of construction workers, but also generally the trade unions of Ukraine. All current problems of the labor market, like informal employment, it's known that 1/3 of Ukrainian labor market, this is informal employment. I'm not quite certain how this is calculated, but if we have, let's say, 20 million who can work, then basically just 8 million are insured. And this is a bit more than 30%, I guess. But then if we also take into account military personnel and other people who are not insured within the social labor system, I think that we arrive at this number more or less. And wage arrears, this is also a danger in our country, ensuring the decent conditions of work, the absence of proper education after a person becomes a part of the labor market, and the absence of the lifetime character of this education. I think all of these problems will be exacerbated by the war. Actually, they are right now. And then the labor contracts being dissolved by big businesses, by big bosses, when workers learn that collective labor agreements are dismissed, dissolved. I think that this problem will also become exacerbated because of the law on labor relations in the conditions of martial law. So the employers seize the chance to inform the workers that all the articles of their labor contracts about social benefits are being suspended during the war. So all the rules governing, for example, hiring and dismissals, this also is something that has been made different because of the war. Right now, employers are not taking into account how vulnerable you are, whether you are a man or a woman, or you have many children, and so on. In the construction sphere, we're talking about massive dismissals, for instance, until the economy starts growing again, being rebuilt again. And this is what the construction workers who are dismissed are being told. So all of this makes the problem more profound within our labor market. And I think the problems I've mentioned have to help us draw one clear conclusion to point us in the direction of thinking what kind of solution we could come up with. We cannot simply accept that the conditions of workers are becoming worse. We cannot simply accept the fact that somewhere trade unions are still living on and somewhere they disappeared. In our construction sphere, the response to that, to this dire situation is this. We do understand that this is a sector with a lot of informal employment, a sphere which has many problems, imbalances of power, extreme imbalances of power between the employer and employee. There are not enough safety and security measures. There are not enough mechanisms to complain about the actions of the employer, to ensure proper inspection and so on. So our question number one, I would say, is to somehow stay in touch with members of trade unions. So let's say there is someone right now working in one region of Ukraine, someone working in a different region of Ukraine. They are outsourced, so to speak, with the technical equipment that they operate to different parts of Ukraine, to different construction sites and so on. So how can they stay in touch and how can they cooperate in these conditions? Here, the digitalization previously mentioned here in a negative context, perhaps by Pavlo, when he talked about trade unions being afraid of digitalization, seeing this as a huge challenge, seeing this digitalization as something that enables the creation of employment platforms, labor platforms, which create a gap between the employer and employee and the trade unions. I think that we are looking at digitalization from a different point of view here as something that helps us to ensure that the needs of the workers are heard and taken care of wherever they are. And this is something that we have been working on during the summer. We launched a new website in the autumn to tackle this issue. We are launching the platform for education regarding labor rights, labor skills. We started the work on this project in 2020 in cooperation with the International Labour Organization. Artem has been an active partner of this process. We would also like to thank the Bureau on Problems of Workers. They listened to our concerns about the potential problems and engaged us in creating this platform, which very soon will start working on our website and which can be used by any trade union in Ukraine. It also contains all sorts of educational materials, not just focused on the construction sector, but also written in such a way that any kind of sector, any kind of industry could use them. Apart from that, we are trying to widen our networks to introduce the members of our organization into all kinds of organizations in the construction sphere. When we see that some employers are looking for employees or people are looking for work, very often this is a step where we jump in when we learn that people are complaining, for example, about not being paid or incurring some kind of injury. We contact people immediately, even if they are not members of a trade union. We inform them about the possibilities of solving the situation, the mechanisms that could help the workers to influence their employers or the lawyers or some other parties to the process in such a way as that they could ensure the protection of their rights. We tell them about the compensation they could receive, etc. So based on the experience we've accrued over the years, we can lay out all the mechanisms and explain all the aspects of the situation. So we hope that sooner or later, these kinds of contexts we establish in the sphere by helping people will ensure a situation where the coherence in the sector grows and a working network that protects labor rights emerges. So we hope that people we've contacted, people we've helped, will be able to share information about us, about people who could help workers with their group mates, with their workmates, sorry. Because us simply, for example, gluing posters to fences around some kind of construction site, this is not really an effective mechanism to spread information. We hope that this will be the case anyway. Right now, the construction workers are quite atomized as workers. There is not enough coherence. There is not enough networking in the sphere, and we hope to change that with help of this sort of contacting and this sort of platform, because we understand that the people we have already contacted, for example, and the people active more or less in the protection of labor rights could be working in vastly different regions of Ukraine and could be relocated to a different place. And a few words about our hopes for the future. I think that when we look at other structures like agricultural, for example, or public services or hotel industries or other spheres, where also the level of informal employment is as high as in the construction sphere, where the destruction of labor rights is also similar, I think the experience we share could be very important. Thank you. And our next speaker is Vasyl Vitaly Dudin from Trudoborona, the protection of workers' rights. I'm very grateful for an opportunity to take part in this discussion. And I think that the topic of labor rights is very important today. It's a scandalous topic for our society.
Спокійно про ці теми поговорити, почуваючи себе в безпеці. Зараз я знаходжусь в одному з таких умовних укриттів. Час дуже
Because of whom we cannot speak today freely. I had to go to the bomb shelter. It's very nice that people around me feel not only they feel not only alarmed for their own safety, but for the rights of the workers. So let me speak about economic outcome of the war and of the latest reforms. So I'd like to partition my speech in several parts: the background, current state of affairs, and the future, as well as my dream. As for the situation, for me not to sound too scientific, so I'd like to speak about my dream as well. So, the labor agreement is some kind of a symbol of welfare, but today it doesn't work that way, in Ukraine in particular, because the war is ongoing. This is the war of the Russian imperialism, and because our neoliberal reformers, they do not understand all the risks that their reforms bring, because it actually attack against the labor law. In the wartime, war has huge impact over all fields, or all industries, including the labor law. We shouldn't forget about this, because there's defense, attack, there's liberation in some way, of course, in different context. There are opponents, and it's not up to me to speak who's a victim and who's an aggressor in the situation of labor relations in Ukraine. Of course, the employers, they have initiative. They can go into attack. They can worsen the situation of workers. The workers try to get united. They fight for what they have, but it's very hard for them. Why is it hard? Because there are some historic conditions of that. Because the situation was formed in the way it is. Our economy is ruined by oligarchs. Our economy works in order to supply raw materials and, for example, raw metals and farming produce. And in this situation, when the economy is weak, it's easier for employers to explain their workers why the latter have no right to live properly, why their salaries cannot reach the European level. Of course, these prerequisites, they worsen the situation workers, but these are not workers who created these conditions. Unfortunately, the reformers' efforts are not focused in order to implement the latest innovations, but to adapt current legislation to the ongoing crisis for the owners, for the capitalists, to decrease, to save some money over the workers. Of course, today we have the crisis, and the unemployment rate is up to 35% at the moment, according to the National Bank data. The situation did not change after the neoliberal legislation was introduced. Since March, 4 laws were adopted: 2146, 2152, 2431, 2444. I'm sorry for all these figures, numbers, but the experts know a lot about these numbers. These numbers are symbols of attacks against workers. They brought lots of pain and tensions, and they did not solve issues of the economy that is under pressure of oligarchs and Russian impact. I would like to say Russian aggression, actually. In March, there was an issue on employment, and today it's also persistent, and it's going sky high. Although the Ukrainian armed forces were able to liberate some territories and the situation seemed to have normalized, there are better conditions for business in Kyiv, Lviv, central Ukraine, but still, those anti-worker laws, they are not cancelled. Some of them are temporary, some of them are permanent. Still, they're like emergency laws, and they're in force as of today, and labor relations are being terminated as a moment, temporarily. People go to the courts in order to protect their rights, and 50% of court cases are in favor of workers, according to our Monitor of Social Movement NGO. You can find the blacklist of employers that actually abused new provisions, and in what way workers fought against this. I think there is a problem not about some rare cases, not about reforms being against the European Union or ILO demands. I think the whole policy in labor sector is about minimization of employers' expenses, and in order to consider labor as the goods. You see, the labor is being operated by the Ministry of Economy in favor of those who own the capital. In these conditions, we cannot expect some civilized dialogue, development of new labor laws. That would be naive. We need some objective prerequisites like no corruptions, free courts, left parties in the parliament. We don't have these institutions. That's why liberalization is extremely dangerous for such countries as our country. Our country has been losing all the advantages it had, like well-educated labor force. Right now, it's cheap labor force only. It's good for some investors, but it's not good for solving the economy issues. Speaking about my forecast, what's next? If a new law on labor is adopted, then we'll have complete degradation of labor law. That would be unfair, and that would have a negative impact on our economy. If the employer won't have any issue as for firing the employees, the employer would do that. Anybody would be fired for any reason. No training. The workers would not be able to object the employer. They would be afraid of them. The employees will not be motivated to improve their qualification. Everything would be according to the employer's needs. For example, the employees would not be able to get additional vacation for getting higher education or second higher education. Besides, we should speak about demographic processes like migration and decrease of births. For example, the law draft decreases the way mothers are being protected. It would be more difficult to have a baby and to continue working. So, in this way, Ukraine will have worse level of labor protection than in any European country, maybe except for Hungary and some Baltic states. In Hungary, where Viktor Orban simply shut down the labor legislation under the COVID-19 prerequisites, and the employers were allowed to regulate almost everything in private contracts with employees. Besides 2012 labor code of Hungary, it was influenced deeply, and it's very easy to fire an employee. The same approach has been implemented in the Baltic states, maybe except for Lithuania. Lithuania has some good cases, but still, these experiences are part of capitalist world, deeply rooted one part. It is about investments, and this worsening of labor rights is connected to generation of jobs. In this way, if we come through this way of neoliberalization by introducing the norms of Hungary, Estonia, then we would have decrease in the number of trade unions, but we'll have unemployment growing because there are no prerequisites for new jobs. Still, I would like to say I have a dream. I dream about that time when the workers will get enough, will have good wages, good for them and their families, and people will be free to choose the way they work, when trade unions would have strong voice, both in the production and on the governmental level, for them to influence any legislation. I'm dreaming about there is no such big gap between Ukraine and the European Union wages, and the government works on less discrimination. And I hope that those who work with trade unions, they have better compensations, more approaches, and in this way maybe a socialist economy would be needed with more influence of the state. Maybe it's possible, and I think it's possible. Thank you for attention. Thank you, Vitaly. Let me take some notes. Let me summarize. Let me find some key points. So you have spoken about neoliberals reformers, about them adopting the labor market to the crisis. I think I have heard that some time before, haven't I? Because the outcome of the shock therapy or the measures of strict economy, those applied by Margaret Thatcher, for example, that failed years after her privatization and deregulation and anti-trade union attempts, they showed that such policy was incapable to create anything new. Instead, it ruined everything they had. all the features of the social state. Everything was privatized for the small number of oligarchs. That had no good impact on economy. Instead, jobs were lost, unemployment grew. I think what you have told us, it echoes those events, and this figure of 35% unemployed, it's really high. And what the Ministry of Economy proposed, even in time of Minister Milovanov, who worked together with Ma'am Tretiakova, who actually said that ILO is outdated as a structure, but all of us know that it was operating a long time before them. Lots of politicians actually criticized ILO, like consulting with workers. What? Who needs that? No, really. Government should speak to the workers, and the hired workers, they stay, they keep working for 10, 30 years, while politicians leave. So the Ministry of Economy once proposed to fight against the gray economy, gray jobs, by legalizing bad jobs, because lots of employers do not legalize the workers because of the high taxes, and instead of fighting non-payment of taxes, instead of fighting for legalization of these workers and for their rights, we have a different process, and actually it's ongoing. The same conference takes place, the Center for Economic Development, if I'm not mistaken, has it. The government officials and business, they're planning a different scenario in order to normalize or to adapt the economy to the crisis. But as you can see, every next adaptation to the crisis, it worsens the crisis instead of offering some progress. So we have seen that after the Great War. So we need strengthening of the state, strengthening of the workers. We need to do that. It's not some reaction to the crisis, but it's background for the further growth. Kirill said this war isn't the first one between Ukraine and Russia. And there was war between Ukraine and Russia before, and it was rather intensive, and people were losing jobs, were losing their workplaces, but the government did not use the situation in order to start an economic boom. Nobody actually did anything. Business did not invest in the territories where everything could be ruined by a missile. You can see that missiles came here and it was a risk. Business doesn't want risk. It doesn't create jobs where everything can be ruined. So this is the governmental role, to create jobs, and it is the role for the trade unions to oversight such situations. So I have a question to our discussion. Mr. Serhiy Savchuk, you told us that the Ministry of Economy has been addressing the ILO about standardization of this law draft on labor and about risks of which we have heard. So can we standardize it? But I have a question. Is it possible? Can this law draft be considered without workers actually working on it, without dialogue with workers? Because the government has been working hard in order to avoid any contact with workers. Everything is presented as emergency. Laws are adopted in this way that workers have no word, and the employers, they're mute and they're saying to their employees, okay, we've done nothing wrong, but right now this is the new law, but don't worry, it's a temporary law. However, yes, it is said that these laws are enforced for the wartime only, but after that, the employers would have to come back to the standard laws. Still, the employers then want to introduce new anti-trade union law that would not be a temporary one, but a permanent law, permanent legislation against workers that would normalize our labor market to the crisis. We won't have development, but we'll have total stagnation and loss of rights. Lots of people who went abroad will not come back because they will see their rights are not guaranteed. If they lost their house, if they lost everything and they are not able to buy new housing because the war is ongoing still. So we have these harsh conditions, and what kind of dialogue can we have in this way? Who wants to answer? Who wants to provide reaction to my question? So what can be the dialogue between the government and workers and trade unions and international labor organization today?
So the algorithm of our action is basically this. We are this technical agency that comments on potential conflicts in the view of international law regarding labor rights and labor relations. We do not take sides. That's why the trade unions and the employers and the governments address us, send to us in order to hear what kind of technical objective assessment we could provide them with, because we are equally remote from all of them and equally close in cooperation with all of them. Our comments are then, well, anyway, that's the design of our work. Our comments should provide the instruments to the government, the employers, to the trade unions to enable them to conduct a discussion, a comprehensive discussion about different articles of the draft law, let's say. Bearing in mind that all three parties to the process want to implement the international labor standards, and that's something that Ukraine is perhaps obliged to be in line with because of the international obligations, the ratification, etc., that Ukraine undertook. So how can such an international standard be implemented, be enshrined in Ukrainian legal framework? Very often, as we can see, even in the verdicts of the court, Ukrainian law prevails over any possible kind of international provision. So our goal is to make sure that all those instruments provided by international legal framework really become tools for the improvement of the situation on the labor market of Ukraine. And this is something that everyone is interested in. The development of this dialogue is something that we hope to see in the future based on the comments we are going to provide by the new year, the dialogue between employers and government and trade unions. I'm not that pessimistic as Artem. Perhaps I'm more optimistic. I think that after the war ends, we will build our future on our own. No one apart from them will build it and nurture us. So I'm looking with more optimism at the potential reform in the sector. I think all of us, we should understand that Ukraine will not be able to become part of the European Union with the national labor laws that violate international European laws. Proper, healthy labor code, a reformed old one, perhaps a new one. People arguing, by the way, whether it should be a law or a code of laws and so on. But anyway, the form is not important. The content is, on the other hand. So a proper, a healthy labor code, labor law will be one of the things that ensures our ascension to the European Union, our integration into the European community. I think this is, or should be, obvious, is obvious for the expert communities, maybe less obvious for our viewers. I don't think that Ukraine will be able to join the European Union with the kind of labor laws we have today. As to the norms that have already become part of the legal framework on labor relations in Ukraine, I think the positive side is that the draft law will replace the older labor code, if it's adopted, of course, and together with all the amendments that have been adopted. But we will need to focus on ensuring the we'll need to ensure that Ukrainian legal framework corresponds to the European, the international principles. When Olena Tretyakova says that many conventions are outdated, I tend to agree with her to a certain degree. Ukraine has taken upon itself some obligations concerning conventions that are outdated, outmoded, in fact, but haven't ratified 4 conventions. We can give up on our obligations to those outdated 10 conventions, and then also take upon ourselves the obligations in terms of those conventions that are really modern and comprehensive today. So I think that this is something that we could agree on, and I'm going to present Olena Tretyakova with a plan to that effect, and I hope that we will be able to work productively in this direction. Working together with the government on, for example, the ratification of the Convention on the use of chemical substances in production, which has been initiated by the Security Council of Ukraine, is also something that is happening today. And we understand that without proper norms on the use of chemical substances in agriculture, in transport, different kinds of industries like the chemical industry, it's impossible to talk about ensuring safe and secure conditions for labor. And even during the war, the work on implementing this convention is being done in Ukraine. So this makes me more optimistic about how the legal framework in the labor sphere could work in Ukraine and correspond to European and international principles. Maybe there are some comments, maybe there are some remarks or questions from our panelists. I can see that Vitaly would like to take the floor. Yes, so hello again. This is what I'd like to share with you. Time passes, flies by. In fact, some time ago, it would have been impossible for me to imagine to be part of this discussion where we bring together experts from different sides, spheres, and we can discuss the issues we're discussing today. I think that the Commons Channel has done a great work transforming their activities. I would say that they are active now in social critique, but also coming up with social alternatives. And it's a real pleasure for me to listen to Serhiy Savchuk, whom I know as an authoritative expert, and I really hope that the International Labour Organization in Ukraine, the process of reform will not be chaotic, that there will be safety mechanisms enshrined in Ukrainian law. And a few words about those safety mechanisms. As we know from history, the mechanisms of checks and balances is very important for any state to have. So this is something that we need in Ukraine in terms of the cooperation relationships between different social partners like employers and employees, for example, in order for us to make it impossible for employers to take some arbitrary decisions, for example. There should be some guarantees against abuse as well. For instance, there could be some national state level three-party boards which agree the positions of different partners. We also have this kind of institution organ in Ukraine, although it does not really function properly. Although this is the mechanism that exists in and works in European countries, including countries from the post-Soviet bloc, in Romania and Bulgaria, for example, the countries that also have undergone this kind of process. Unfortunately, in our case, this institution is not really, although it exists, is not really effective, or it performs a slightly different function. So when I said that it should be impossible for some laws to be passed without the agreement, the approval from the side of trade unions, I think it's fair. I think it should be really true. Without the support of the representatives of the trade unions, it should be impossible to pass laws, implement laws. Unfortunately, historically speaking, we have many cases where laws have been adopted that were nonetheless widely criticized by trade unions. This is not something that we should emulate in the future. Any kind of organ, any kind of institution that we organize when we talk about the cooperation of state and employees, this kind of organization should also be on the side of the weakest party, workers, employees who are underrepresented. So we are talking about, for example, this kind of monitoring and control authority of this organization to stop some processes, work processes that create danger for the workers during the war. And then we should an efficient, just and quick functioning court system, the way it happens now when, for example, the judicial system isn't able to inform people properly about some decisions or about the peculiarities of its functioning during the wartime, this is unacceptable. So we need to evaluate the social benefits to be gained from certain mechanisms, certain laws, and we need to ensure this existence of safety mechanisms, the system of check and balances, and to ensure dialogue. Right now, unfortunately, I would say that employers and employees are in a very imbalanced conditions in terms of power.
Дивиться в стрімі, що ви можете писати коментарі, ставити свої запитання до дискусії.
Let me remind everybody that you can ask questions, you can post your comments for our discussion for everybody. And I can see that Kirill, you have your hand raised, and we have a question to you, by the way, from the comments. So you know that there is attack against the worker rights in Ukraine, and people are not allowed to protect their rights. What steps ILO has been doing in order to provide pressure on the government to protect people? So I think, Kirill, you could give your answer and also give your comment if you have some. And besides, maybe Serhiy after that will also answer that. So Kirill, the floor to you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, it's indeed quite worrying, the initiatives which are now being discussed and passed through the parliament in Ukraine. And it's really surprising because if we look at the content of this suggested legislation, which deteriorates the workers' rights, this is actually the way Russia was doing for the past years, one after another. And it looks like more or less a copy of the Russian labor law reform. So it is really strange to observe it from a distance. But I think it has to be mentioned. The path of Ukraine should not be the path of Russia. For all it's obvious, it has to be a different path. It's actually have to go in a different direction towards European values and European principles in terms of the labor relations. What I also wanted to add to the discussion is really the ILO and other UN system organizations. They have a huge influence on the situation locally. And there is a lot of criticism about how these structures are functioning. One of the interesting observation to make also related to Russia, which is now an aggressive country. But for many years, Russia was highly praised by all ILO officials for so-called developed system of social dialogue, which actually included a wide range and a huge number of the collective bargaining agreements, which covered almost the whole country and formally covered most of the working population. In fact, most of these documents were empty papers. They had no substance. And we have, I think it will be quite justified to ask the ILO about how did it happen with a huge office in Moscow, operating with dozens of experts in the country and around, which allowed this situation to be going without any critical observation. The deterioration of labor law, the various and many facts of violations of workers' rights, and at the same time a high-ranking praise from the ILO formally, with the general director of the organization visiting the country so many times, which unfortunately he didn't do. He didn't manage to visit Ukraine even once in the terms of him being in office. So there is a lot of questions. There are lots of questions, and of course, no one is ideal and perfect in this world. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that we have to undermine the ILO. Just the opposite. We need the ILO to be more strong. And in my vision and progression for the future and democratic Ukraine, I will just repeat: Ukraine should become much more active in the ILO and should be a leading country. There is every possibility and potential for that. Of course, if this neoliberal trend in the political field can be overcome, and but the potential is there, and you know how to unlock it. Thank you for your attention.
Гаразд. Ну,
Okay,
я не хочу виправдовувати свій,
I don't want
безумовно, не знаю, як просто
to speak about my pessimism, but as any labor activist who has some experience, I am, so to say, an optimist of maximum level, but an optimist that has seen lots of bad things around him, and the things intensified after the big war started in Ukraine. That's why I try to get prepared to the worst, but I plan the best. I hope that really the workers' movement in Ukraine and international trade unions, they would be able to strengthen the ILO, and the ILO would be able to strengthen the social dialogue in Ukraine. And this way I expect, I hope, that those things that we fight for, like the individual freedom, right to decide, right to solve all kinds of issues at the workplace and so on, because the world of cooperation is the world of potential conflicts. But the whole world of people is the world of conflicts. We cannot read our minds, and we are trade union activists. We can see that some people don't speak about their own problems. They discuss their problems in the kitchens, but they are not ready to act in order to protect their rights. You can make some shifts from these to civil positions of people, because lots of people speak about issues on their kitchens, but they do not act, they do not protect their rights, they do not try to change the course of their country. They can stop tanks that are attacking the adjacent country. I think Russian workers, it was hard for them to stand for their own rights, for their own self-determination. They were afraid of police, and it was harder for them that we could believe, but we couldn't believe that this horrible war would be the next thing. Nobody expected such things from Russians. Right now we have this horrible enemy that is committing all kinds of war crimes, horrible war crimes. That's why I think that today's discussion was able to determine some kind of a horizon. We were able to exchange our opinions, and I hope we'll follow what's going on in our country. We'll take part in this, and we'll be demanding the movement in proper direction for this side without conflict, but with social dialogue and general social welfare. I can see two more hands raised. Let me give floor to you. You have 2 minutes. So we have up to 15 minutes for today's discussion. That's the maximum. We cannot keep our interpreters here more. So 2 minutes for you, Serhiy. Thank you, Artem. I would like to react. Yes, the thesis was very interesting about the labor inspection. We've been working a lot in this direction, and we are going to propose to introduce the national analysis in order to determine the functions of the national labor inspection and to pass some its functions. For example, those that are relevant to market, to some other organization. Speaking about the labor reform, yes, the ILO is relevant and is present here. And you know that the whole discussion that was going on, the mobilization of the international reaction about the law drafts, it was about the commentaries, technical commentaries developed by the ILO. Kirill, I think he was able to provide a very interesting, informative prerequisite about collective agreements and in what way should I say this? That there is huge difference between a big number of workers being under these collective agreements and on the other hand, these agreements being void. So I can state that we have a very similar tendency in Ukraine. Yes, I read a very interesting research. It was performed more than 10 years ago, but still it was analysis for these collective agreements in Ukraine, and it stated more than 10 years ago it was an issue, like lack of added value in very, very big collective agreements made on the regional level or between enterprises, total lack of hierarchy between regional and industrial levels, lack of presence of employers in some industries, lack of notion of industry, lack of economic activity understanding, lots of issues. All of them are classified. And there are some conclusions. So my recommendation for everybody is to read this document that I can share. So first of all, I think that the workers and the employers should be in touch in order to deal with the issues. Besides, that there is some dependency between, or at least partial understanding that of the issue, but still there is lack of drive of political will to change the situation. So the situation can be changed, but everybody needs to put efforts, workers, trade unions, everybody. Thank you. So
Thank
Vitaly,
you, and the floor is given to Vitaly. So it has been mentioned before today already, our country is facing unprecedented challenges, but as we have also mentioned today, our experience is not quite unique. There is a set of different mechanisms and knowledge and so on. In particular, worked upon by the International Labour Organization, which shows us how we can deal with such kinds of challenges in the time of the war or after the war. I focused on the negative developments in labor legislation in such countries as Hungary, for example, but also we need to mention the inclusive positive development based on the examples of Poland, for example, where they also had this radical transformation from state-governed economy to market economy. Also Croatia, Slovenia, countries like Croatia faced the war, for example, and implemented the labor legislation, which works in many ways in the interests of employers and employees, where we have, for example, boards of workers, boards of employees, who basically take part in decision making together with the employers according to the best European practices. And this is something we need to pay attention to in terms of labor legislation. And as to social and economic development, I hope that the main motive for the development of economy will be the social justice, creating really humane conditions for labor, taking care of the workers. And in that case, I think that gender inequality and precarious and informal employment, those things will be mitigated, will decrease. I know that our situation is very far from ideal, but I think that all of us will do everything possible in order for the post-war development of Ukraine to be a really positive experience, in order for our post-war development and reconstruction to become a stellar example of how a country after war can be developed in the best interests of the society for its benefit. So I hope that people in other countries of the world will be proud of us, and we ourselves will be proud of our work. Goodbye, everyone. I was happy to be here today from Social Movement, Социальный Рух organization. Thank you, everyone, for finding time to join us today in this difficult time. Thank you for trying to stay optimistic about our situation. I would say that this ability to stay optimistic is actually a characteristic of the Ukrainian people. Our ability to look into the future and to find something optimistic, something that gives us hope even in the darkest of times. And I think that our discussion today has been productive. Thanks, everyone. Ukraine will win, and we will be ready to implement the most progressive practices, the best kind of legislation in the country which will receive a lot of investment, is receiving investment today, and is something that everyone around the world is looking at. And I hope that the investments we receive, the attention we receive, will become an important resource. And in the process of reconstruction, the rights of our workers will be guaranteed by the Ukrainian laws, by international legislation, and that the organizations monitoring these processes will play a key role in protecting the rights of workers, because they can guide or determine certain trends in the labor sphere, because they are the ones who protect the rights of the workers to a decent existence, decent life for themselves and for their families, and ensure their own future and the future of their country. So thank you for being part of this discussion. Peace. Let your life be peaceful, and I wish all of us to achieve victory as soon as possible. Goodbye.